Hi, my name is Hollis. I play as Rilan Ludel. Welcome back to my series on scripting NPCs, droids, and quests using Lisp. In today's video, we're going to talk about variables, all the different types of variables, and how to use them. This is important for if you want to remember previous dialogue choices or branching narratives, as well as for sharing information between NPCs for quests. I made this test script that's very useful for testing and understanding the differences between the different types of variables. I'm going to show you very briefly some examples. You can copy this from the description of this video to test out more on your own. Then I'm going to talk about the differences and how to use them in more depth, talk about some precautions, and then I'm going to add a variable to my quest script. So here we have regular variable like you've seen before with the normal definition, and then we have our three types of persistent variable. Persistent as in being stored more permanently, persisting between conversations between NPCs. So just to test them out, I'm going to add 2 to all variables by calling a function twice. That just adds 1 to all variables. And you can see those very functions here if you want to know how they work. So this is before they all start at 0, and then after they all add up to 2. Makes sense. Here, now I'm going to click this, just read the values again without changing anything. And this is where things start to get tricky. You can see all the rest stay the same, but the regular variable reset to 0. That's kind of the limitation of normal variables. Whenever you click a link or refresh the page, the regular variable reset to whatever the default value was. And so we can do that again. You can see here I can add 1 to it, but if I read it again, it'll reset to 0. Let me add to all these. If I refresh the page, as expected, the regular variable resets again, but so does the session variable. It resets to the default that you set. We'll come back to this, but for now we're going to go a bit deeper into the differences. So this is kind of a cheat sheet compiled from some things that I've tested out myself, as well as I've read from Kay Dalben's and Lilith Delcraw's tutorials. So we have our regular variable, as you've seen before, and it kind of belongs to or is held by the script or code. It's assembled when the script is being used, and it resets, as mentioned, when you refresh or press the talk button, and you can manually change the value by using set. It's really useful for short-term calculations. You just want to calculate a random number or a probability, or if you have something in the script that you use multiple times and you want to be able to change it in one place. Here we have our persistent variables. So the first time that they are used, they are given a default variable that you set, but after that they're stored in some permanent place, and so when you change them, it changes the permanent, and the default is no longer used, except for session variable. So again, session belongs to each separate conversation. It resets to the default when there's a page refresh or you press the talk button. You can change it by using save-var function call. You can use set-var for all the persistent variables, but it's not as preferred because it looks too much like set. So I'd recommend using save-var. And session-var is really good for calculations or inputs that need to last throughout the conversation, not just once. But there's not a lot of uses for it otherwise. This is probably the least used type of variable. Ovar and evar are very popular. Ovar is the most used persistent variable. You can think of it as only one person, so it belongs to that unique NPC or droid or module and that character who is interacting with it. This is really good for questProgress variables or for remembering player choices because, again, it is unique to that character. The other version is the evar, the everyone, every player or the entity variable. And you can think of it more like a scorecard for a game. It's good for storing environmental changes made by the players because it's unique to that NPC droid or module that it belongs to, whereas ovar is unique to each player. So here are some guidelines for creating persistent variables. You need to use the define variable function. You give it the name that you're going to use throughout the script. I like to keep this something kind of short, easy to type. And then open parentheses, we're going to use the ovar function. It just means we're defining an R variable, and they use a single quotation mark, or otherwise known as a backtick. And then you give it the name for the storage. It's important that you use a kind of unique name. So just an example of why giving it a unique name is important. Let's say I forgot that I had a variable in storage on this NPC, connected to this NPC and character with this name, and I give it a new variable name, and I give it a new default value, and then I go to try to use it, it will still keep that old value. I can't rewrite the storage variable using a function definition. So that's why it's really important you don't just name it X or Y or myvar. Give it something unique. The storage name, and then you give it a default value. So for example, questProgress, you give it this really long unique name, and I start at 0. And if you want to change it, you need to use the save-var function, and you say the name of the variable and then the new value. So for example, call that variable +1. That's what this expression means. And that's the new variable. If you just add 1 to your variable, it's not going to change the actual variable. That's like if someone asks you, what's your age +2? It wouldn't change your actual age. You would just tell them what your age is +2. That's why you have to use the save-var to actually change the value, change your age or whatever. Some things to watch out for. You can use set on a persistent variable and it will not give you an error. So just watch out for that. If you are using persistent variables and you're trying to change them and it seems like it's not working, check if you're using save-var or set, because it's kind of a silent error, a silent issue. But we can use save-var, set-var, and reset them manually. So now we're back with the Jeraldar Tater-Tot quest. I've added some new parts to the function, which I'm going to go over really quickly. I replaced the 0 here in the quest variable definition with an ovar declaration so that it can persist between conversations. I've added a commented out part in start so that I can reset it if I need to test it again, as well as a debug so that I can visibly see where the quest is at, which is good for when I'm just testing out the quest. I'll delete that later. And then also at the end of the first dialogue part, I've added a save-var. So I'll go through that real fast. You can see that the variable starts at 0. I get the introduction, and we do the normal conversation. And then here the droid tells me what to do next. And that is typically when I would update the variable to the new value. So you can see when I refresh, now the value is at 5. Instead of telling me the whole thing again, the droid just tells me what I need to remember to do for the next step in the quest. That's it for variables. In order to add another NPC to the next part of the quest, we're going to need to talk about modules, which I will talk about in the next video. So subscribe if you want to see that. And thanks again to Kay Dalben and Lilith Delcroix for their help so far.